Well, uh, good morning. we, I am having some trouble. So I guess I'm gonna have to go read my user agreement with this program we're using. But I am only able to project or stream to here, and I chose my personal Facebook page because there are people that log in there, and I will have to do some research and discover what's going on with our account. Anyway, welcome. Those of you who are joining me from my personal Facebook page, it's good to have you here. We are continuing a little chat about Matthew 25, and this is our 20-minute coffee break. And because I was having trouble, I couldn't get at my little tag. And anyway, by the way, I feel like it's important for you to know that you all can have coffee at 10 o'clock and have a coffee break, but why am I not having coffee? So I've got coffee, so I thought maybe I better make myself some. And I've got my handy dandy little East Troy Bible Church mug. Let's see if that works. We'll see here. I'll make sure I can get some coffee and have some with you. Is it working? Something's working. That's a good sign. It's it's a privilege and honor to be with you today, and oh my goodness, man, I am really struggling. As you can tell, this has been a week that's not been my perfect week, right? All right, well, I'm going to set that up there, and good to have you here, Cal. Good to see you, Michael Odell. Anyway, glad that you're here. Today, we're going to continue a series in Matthew 25, and like I said, you guys get coffee, and I have been getting coffee. Now, I have back here a little Nespresso maker, and that makes me a barista, right? Honestly. I'm making espresso. It just happens to be in a little pod, and a little machine is doing it for me. But doesn't that make me a barista? Now, one of my daughter's careers has been in college to become a barista, as many college students become. And a barista is someone who learns the art of coffee. They learn temperatures, they learn pressures, they learn the types of coffee, the roasting types, the why is a coffee light or dark, and the types of coffee from all over the world. Baristas know a lot about coffee. They know lots of types of coffees. So, is it a latte? Is it an espresso? What is it, right? So just because I make a cup of coffee with a machine doesn't make me a barista. Now, you might say to yourself, Ron, I know you well enough to know that you love coffee. Kathy and I didn't drink coffee until we came to Wisconsin. So cheers, by the way. Here's my East Troy Bible Church mug. I'm wearing my East Troy Bible Church shirt, so I'm all East Troy Bible Church decked out today. Wow, that's hot. Wow, it's been a morning. So, if you know though, if you were to come into my kitchen, you would know that in every cupboard there's a coffee apparatus somewhere. I've got a drip maker, I've got a Chemex, the pour over, I've got the little pour over filter thing that you put on the top of the cup. I've got a French press. I've got the AeroPress that Graceland got me at Christmas. And you grind up the coffee, and I hand grind it, by the way, like all hipsters do, because I'm a hipster, right? And then I pour the water in this little thing, and I press it down, and it makes a cup of coffee. I've got the Keurig. I've got an espresso maker at home. This one was free because of my Amazon points, and so it's in my office here at church. Now I can have coffee wherever I go. But to be honest, just because I own all the gear and because I make lots of different types of coffee at home, I even have one of those little Italian things that you put on the stove, and it makes like real espresso through pressure. What else do I have? So I already talked about the French press. I've got something else too. What is it? Anyway, I've got tons of coffee making devices at home, but do any of those things make me a barista? Just because I have the gear or just because I like coffee doesn't make me a barista. And it doesn't mean that I should open a coffee shop. I like a good cup of coffee just like you, but just because you like a good cup of coffee doesn't make you a barista at all, does it? So, just like fishermen, just because I own a custom-made fishing pole that Tom Zarnecki helped me make, and just because I have the lures and the tackle, and because I have the lake and I have gone fishing in the past, doesn't make me a fisherman. So that's the situation in Matthew 25. I hope that you've read it between now and then, and if you haven't read it, we're not going to read it today. But in summary, Jesus gives three basic teachings. Two are parables, and one is an outright discourse about the return of Jesus Christ. And in all three, he features two different types of servant, a good servant and a wicked servant. And these two servants are considered part of his staff. This master, whoever's in the story at the time, it could be one of the things we get from that is that Jesus is not just talking to people outside of the church congregation or outside of the fellowship of believers that are with him at that moment as he's on the Mount of Olives. He is talking to people who call themselves followers of Jesus. And so the question is raised, yesterday we mentioned it, that if Jesus has followers in his group that aren't true, then is Jesus demanding a works-based salvation, which would be incongruent with the rest of the New Testament. In order to have a proper relationship with God, we know that the law has to be fulfilled. Now, I want to give you a reminder of the two things that are facing the audience. The immediate audience of Jesus is about to face the crucifixion of Christ, and more particularly to this discussion, the betrayal of Jesus. So one of Jesus' own followers is about to betray him and send Jesus to his death. So Judas looks like a follower of Jesus. He has followed Jesus throughout the entire gospel, and yet now we see him betraying. So this is very important for the immediate audience. The secondary audience is Matthew's audience, and Matthew's audience has been starting to experience a number of things. First of all, they've been kicked out of the synagogue. They have begun to be ostracized from the Jewish community. The second thing is that, and we know this from Peter's own life, that legalists have stepped into the crowd and begun to confuse the gospel message. The third thing is that in just a few years after Matthew's written, and still being circulated fresh among the church, the Greek and Roman type of Hellenistic type of religion called Gnosticism, or philosophy called Gnosticism, creeps into the church, which emphasizes the idea that the mind and the intellect and the heart, the soul, are the most important parts of a person. And the body is evil and not good, but the soul and the mind and the spirit are good. Therefore, what happens in the body doesn't matter. And so for Matthew's readers, the text in Matthew 25 becomes very important. The last thing you need to know about this text is that for us to really understand this clearly and to isolate it from the rest of the Gospels is that Jesus has not yet lifted the cup in the Last Supper and said, "This represents a new covenant in my blood for the forgiveness or the remissions of sins." He had not yet gone to the cross and died. So these are Old Testament believers whose landscape of belief is centered around fulfilling and completing the law. And they are still entrenched in this mindset. But that being said, that goes without saying, Jesus is still addressing these people in that context. So the specific language of Ephesians 2, 8, and 9, which we are familiar with, or Romans 3 and 4, and all of Romans, hasn't been written. Ephesians 2 and chapter 3 hasn't been written. Galatians 5 hasn't been written. Jesus is talking to people. And so what is his purpose for ladling on this heavy language that's really scary? 5 times at least he talks about his own servants going to hell, to a place of weeping and gnashing of teeth. He talks about scary language. So there's 3 conclusions that can be drawn. First of all, that Jesus is promoting a works-based salvation. Secondly, you could ascertain from this text that Jesus is promoting the idea that you can lose your salvation or lose fellowship with God. Or the third idea is something altogether different. And I'm voting for the third one. If you, like I said on Sunday, if you believe that you can lose your salvation, this is not your proof text. If you believe that you should work out your salvation and that you should do that with fear and trembling, this is still not your proof text. This is a proof text for being prepared. The main purpose of Jesus saying these words at the end of Matthew 24 and the beginning of Matthew 25 is to prepare his disciples for a few things. First of all, for his unexpected return. Jesus will return, but he's going to either be quick or he's going to be delayed. But there is no understanding and no sign or no season in which Jesus is going to return without for people to know ahead of time. In other words, the disciples can't be prepared. They must instead be continually prepared. And so Jesus' point in this text is that true followers of Jesus Christ have the affect or the lifestyle of expectancy of the imminent return of Jesus. That is the point of this text. The secondary point of this text is that there are some people who call themselves followers of Jesus that are not true followers of Christ. So both of those ideas are at play here, and now I'd like just to go and focus on the two texts. And we're going to start in Matthew 24 and just start at verse 36, and we're going to go down to verse 51 and just briefly talk about it. I'm going to read it for you, and then we're going to get into the bridal party and just talk through that. Remember that the main idea here is that Jesus is encouraging people to be prepared. He's not inferring that people are losing their salvation. What he's inferring is that people that are part of the group are not true, i.e. Judas, i.e. the legalists in Galatians chapter 1 and 2, i.e. The Gnostics, which we see in other passages of Scripture. Excuse me while I have another warm cup of coffee. So let's read. But concerning the day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son. See, Jesus claims that there is no sign, but the Father only. For as were the days of Noah, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day when Noah entered the ark. And they were unaware until the flood came and swept them all away. So will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then 2 men will be in a field, and one will be taken and one left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, and one be taken and one left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. That's the point. For you do not know. Jesus doesn't know either. He has limited himself in his knowledge of this event. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you must also be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Okay, there's the theme. That's what Jesus is trying to communicate. Don't add anything to the text that isn't there. We know the context. We know the situation that Jesus is trying to present himself as the true King of Kings, and the true King of Kings is telling them that they should be ready for his return. Now, they might be still confused about why he's going, or that he's going at all, but he is still predicting that he is going to be coming back at a time. The Jewish people expected the return of Christ, or the coming of the Messiah, to be actually like the return of Christ described in the Scriptures. They didn't expect a Messiah to come as a baby born as a virgin. They just assumed that Jesus would be, or the Messiah would come and set up his kingdom. They didn't expect this little parenthesis, if I might use that word, in history. Who then is the faithful and wise servant? So now Jesus starts to describe the 2 types of servants that are following him. These are the 2 types of people that are within his crowd at that moment, including Judas and including some others. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over the household to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is the servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. In other words, the master has given him, in verse 47, mastery over all of his possessions. This is called stewardship. So another thing we said on Sunday is that a servant of Jesus Christ is a steward of the Messiah's things. And what are we a steward of? Well, Jesus is going to talk about that later in the sheep and goat judgment. But there then is another type of servant that is possible that could exist in the early church or in Jesus' own disciples or today, and that is this wicked servant. Notice they're still called servants. They're still called part of Jesus' followers. They're still part of the group, and yet they're wicked. Now, they don't have malice necessarily. They don't have anger, pride. What they have is slothfulness. They're lazy. They have decided to take advantage of the delay of the Messiah for their own advantage, and they go back to living the way they would have lived had they not known the master previously. The wicked servant says to himself, "My master's delayed." And so, what does he do? He begins to beat his fellow servants. He eats and drinks with drunkards. In other words, he's just a glutton. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour that he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. Jesus is using a very emphatic language about the response of God to this wicked servant. The wicked servant simply says, "You know what? He's not returning. And since he hasn't returned, I'm just going to do what I want to." Now, we said this on Sunday, but notice something that's interesting about this servant. This wicked servant is still a believer that the Messiah or the Master is returning. He has not given up that belief. He still believes it. It simply says that my master is delayed. He doesn't say that my master is no longer my master, I'm leaving my master, or that my master is not coming back. He simply says he's delayed. That's important because Jesus is indicating here that there are people in his followership that believe in him. Now, we say to our children, believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you'll be saved, right? Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. So the centerpiece of this text is the difference between belief and trust. Now, you can believe, like I said yesterday, you can believe you're a fisherman, but if your life doesn't depend on fishing, then likely you're a hobbyist. I can call myself a barista because I drink coffee and I make coffee. That's good. But that doesn't make me a barista, does it? It doesn't give me any right to sell the coffee. My life doesn't depend on coffee. I can give up coffee whenever I want. That's true, actually. So it doesn't make me a barista. It's just the same way. It's just because you believe in Jesus or like his teachings or think he's great or even think he's the master or just think that he's returning one day doesn't mean that you are a true and faithful follower of Jesus. You can be with Christ and yet be false. You can be with Jesus and be faithless. So, we said yesterday the difference between the fisherman. Here's another example. I've known many people to believe, and I think all of you would say, that eating well and getting exercise are the keys to a good and healthy life. Wouldn't you say that to be true? Wouldn't you agree that getting daily exercise and eating fruit and vegetables, low carbohydrates, and fat is good food? Eating fats, eating protein, eating vegetables, eating lean foods, and getting lots of exercise and good sleep would be the recipe of a healthy life. You'd be doing yourself a favor if you did that. But yesterday I want to tell you something. Can you keep a secret for me? I ate 7 thin Oreo cookies. You know the kinds that you get in the grocery store? They're the ultra thin. I don't go for the double stuff. I like the thin ones. They're crispy. And they're still full of taste, and they have less calories, right? So you can eat 4 of those and only have 140 calories. Well, that's the same as a beer or a Coca-Cola, so that's not really health food. Good. But I ate 7. They were the kinds that were the they were the dark chocolate ultra thins. They are unbelievable. It's like some kind of a, I don't know. It's magical. So I know that exercise is good. I know that eating good food is good. And yet I ate seven cookies. See, there's a lot of people. But have you ever met a person whose life depended upon them eating healthy and living healthfully? I've known a few people that have gotten cancer, and they have made enormous changes in their life in order to become well, right? They become juicers. They eat fruits and vegetables. They cut sugar completely out because cancer lives on sugar. How about watching The Biggest Loser? There's that Waukesha sheriff. Remember that guy? And he was on that show, and the amount of work he put into it. I mean, when your life depends on it, you will do what it takes in order to become healthy. And so that's the difference between a person that's a hobbyist or a believer and a person who has faith and trust in the life of Jesus. When your life depends on the Master returning, when your life depends on Jesus returning, when you can't envision a world or a life without Jesus, when you realize that your future and your eternity and your health for today and for tomorrow and for your family depends and is centered on squarely upon Jesus and Jesus only, then that's the kind of follower that Jesus is looking for. That's the prepared kind of follower. And that kind of follower of Jesus will be the kind of follower that will always be looking to the sky for the return of the Messiah. See, that's the kind of servant that Jesus calls the faithful and wise servant, who does what he needs to do in this time to remain healthy and ready, a state of readiness. Have you ever talked about anybody in the military who has been under the threat of war? There's always their unit, their post is always under a sense of readiness, and it's fatiguing almost. But that the threat of war, or the imminent threat of war, has created many of our young men and women to be on edge a lot. That's why a lot of them come back with PTSD. Now, Jesus doesn't have the negative side of that in mind for the servant. I mean, the life with Christ, the expectancy of Jesus is not the threat of war for the believer. The true follower of Christ, the expectancy for Jesus is this joyful, like, I can't wait. I was talking to someone yesterday in the grocery store who just began to weep because they had seen a beautiful video from their childhood that they didn't know existed, and they saw their grandparents and their mothers and mom and dad in the baseball stands, and they saw this video for the first time and were so moved by it that they were still emotionally engaged when I saw them in the grocery store. And we had a chance to talk, and I said this. I said, that's why heaven is so important, I said. And I said, I was thinking about what I said to my daughter, Graceland, this last week. I said, she was grieving about her college senior year at Cedarville ending with no fanfare or joy. It just ended. And even the convocation, even the commencement was flat, It wasn't the same as being with her friends and going through this whole process and receiving her degree and walking on stage and being recognized. And I said, you know what, Grace, had you gone and had we had a commencement, had you had a graduation, you would have still had that inevitable moment where you had to say goodbye, where you had to pack up your things and leave campus, where your life at the Cedarville was over. And I said, the difference between your experience, your sadness over that small joy is in comparison to the great joy of heaven, because in heaven, when Christ returns, when we get to step into the presence of Jesus, that's the beginning of the party. The party begins at the beginning. And then you no longer have to say goodbye. You no longer have to watch hours of sad video of your family from days gone by, because you are with them in the presence of Christ. For those of you who are true followers of Jesus, you will be able to spend the rest of eternity with this great Messiah. It's not war. This great Messiah has a great and wonderful inheritance prepared for you in advance. 1 Peter chapter 1. An inheritance that's incorruptible, imperishable, doesn't rust like your truck or your car, doesn't fall apart like your house, doesn't end like the parties and the good parties end, or a wonderful anniversary holiday would end, or or a college season would end. Heaven is a party that begins and continues. No more saying goodbye. So the faithful follower of Jesus, the faithful servant of the Master, is one who has a good idea, a joyful hope in the return of Christ. That is the first affect, the first fruit of a true follower of Christ. A false follower of Christ, a wicked follower of Christ, may say they are a barista. They might say they're a fisherman. They might say that they eat healthy, but they still eat Oreos because they really don't believe it. When I ate those Oreos, you know what I was saying to myself? I really don't need health today. I don't really believe it. You know what I did? I gave it to my son. I showed him where I had been hiding my Oreos, and I let him have them. The idea there is, I said to Kathy, please, I want these so bad, but don't buy them for me again because you know what I was doing? I was repenting of my bad eating because I realized that all that sugar and that junk was not going to be helpful to me living healthfully. If I say I'm going to live healthy, be lean and strong, there's no way that I should be eating Oreos, right? And so the wicked servant says, they really aren't believers. They really don't believe. I mean, in the way that we use the word belief. What they really are struggling with is they really don't trust or have faith that Jesus is true, that he's truly the Messiah. The wicked servant is a servant of Christ who says to them, I really don't believe he is who he says he is. I don't believe he's really returning. I don't really think he's all that. I don't think, in other words, their lives don't depend on him. This wicked servant in the text, this foolish wicked servant, is one that found his life and his joy and his happiness in beating people, in eating whatever he wanted, in doing whatever he wanted. He was living for himself. He was indulging his own emotions and his own flesh. He just wants to live for himself. He's self-absorbed. He's self-interested. He cares for his own. And so the mark of a false follower of Jesus is not that they don't or do attend church. That's not the criteria. In fact, there are people that attend church, even the East Troy Bible Church, that aren't true followers. The true follower of Jesus is someone whose life depends on his salvation. They can't live without him. A false, wicked follower of Jesus may go to church, may say that they do the Eucharist or the communion, may read the Bible, may even do an online Bible study with their small group, but that doesn't make them a true believer. A true believer, a true follower of Jesus, they shape their whole life around Jesus. A wicked follower is self-absorbed, self-interested, and just does what his flesh tells him to do, and will do whatever he wants to do, whenever he wants to do it. They may go to church, they may really look polished, they may have honor, they may have hidden all their shame and hidden all of their bad things and all of their bad lustful thoughts. They might have just been able to mitigate all that. They may be even really good people who even practice the law. But if their lives don't depend on Jesus, then they won't be expectant of him. And when the moment and the opportunity comes to be self-indulgent, they will do it. And this is what bothers me about myself. Did you hear that? It bothers me about myself. I had a lady call me this week and said this passage gave her a sense of panic. And I said to her, I have the same feeling. I have panic too. When I read these things, you know what I see? I know my heart. And I know that my default setting is the wicked, slothful, self-indulgent, self-absorbed servant that does what he feels like he wants to do. The only hope that I have, and that I felt this lady who called this week had, was that both of us panicked. Both of us felt convicted, cut, worried, concerned that we might be counted as a slothful, wicked servant. See, the crisis is not whether this text is about whether or not we lose our salvation or whether we have to work for our salvation. The text is whether we care. And my thought is today, if you read this and you see yourself as the wicked servant, my thought is that you are well on your way because you've observed that and because you've seen it in your own life, that you're well on your way to being a faithful servant. I don't think that the faithful servant struggles I think the faithful servant is still going to struggle with doubt. They're going to still struggle with delay. They're going to still struggle with rolling their sleeves up and keeping their hand to the plow, even though their master doesn't return. And we'll see that in the bridal text, and we'll see that in the three servant texts, and even the sheep and the goat. I mean, I don't. Just because they're faithful doesn't mean it's easy. It just means they've made a decision. They've prioritized their life around Jesus, the Master, who has given them everything. They are stewards of everything that the Master has given them. They are stewards over his house. And that's what Jesus is telling the disciples. He's saying, I am leaving you, and you are going to be stewards of everything I have, everything I own. You can be stewards of the world, the earth. You can be stewards of the people. You can be stewards of the truth. You're going to be stewards of the gospel message, the inheritance incorruptible. Everything. I'm going to give you everything that I've given them, the world, I'm giving you to steward, to manage, to entrust. I mean, he's entrusting all of that. And the disciples have a choice. Will we lose heart? And will we get tired? And will we decide to feed ourselves? Or will we care for the others? Will we care? Will we care about the household of the Master? And give to the household food at the proper time. In other words, the steward was to care for the people in the household of the Master. And the reason they could do that is because their life depended on the Master. When slaves step out from underneath their identity as a slave or steward and start taking on the role of the Master, that's when wickedness is observed. In other words, the steward is humble. A humble person, a faithful servant is a humble person who is expectantly waiting and living for Jesus. And this is the natural outpouring, the natural outgrowth, the produce of true faith, confident faith, where your whole confidence and trust is placed on Jesus and Jesus alone. Because I lost track of time at the beginning of this, I have no idea what time we're at. So I'm going to cut it there and just say a word of prayer for you. Lord, I don't know about the people that are listening or who will listen later today, but this text in the end of Matthew 24 identifies two different types of servants. And my guess is that many of us have identified ourselves honestly with the wicked servant. We are self-indulgent. We are oftentimes we lose heart. We see the delay that you've had and live for ourselves. And all of us have taken those moments and had those moments. But Lord, I pray that you would quicken us, quicken our spirits, as the Methodists used to say, that you would work in our hearts and call us back to yourself. There is room in this story for the wicked servant before the coming of the Son of Man to return to faithfulness. Jesus, you don't isolate that part of the story. But in the delay, had the wicked servant, had Judas said, you know what, I was wicked. I was living for myself. And come to you, even at the cross. Had Judas crawled up to the cross and let the blood of Christ that he caused drip onto him, he would have been just like the thief. And Jesus, you would have remembered him in your kingdom. You would have brought him in, and he would move from the son of perdition to the son of glory, from the son of Satan to the son of God. There it was time, and yet Judas killed himself. But had he done it, his wickedness would have turned into blessing. He would have seen that what he did was horrible and awful, but then he would have seen the glory of the gospel manifest through this evil deed, just as you said, and just as Joseph said, what man intended for evil, God intended for good. This would have been true for Judas, and it would be true for us today if we would just come under the cross and say, Jesus, forgive us for being self-absorbed. Forgive us for being idiots. Forgive us for being shameful. Forgive us for being self-interested and me-theists, worshipers of me, myself, and I, the trinity of self. Forgive us. And if we were to let the blood of the covenant, Jesus Christ, drip on us and cover us, we would have been forgiven by God. Murderers of Jesus forgiven by God. Help us to enjoy you today through your Spirit and through your word. Help our lives. Let us see that our lives depend upon you and cannot go on without you. In Jesus' name, amen. May this have been encouraging to you today. May the Lord bless you and keep you. And we'll see you tonight at 6 p.m. on the East Troy Bible Church Facebook group for prayer meeting. Hopefully it will work. Thanks. Have a great day.